Well, hello everyone. Welcome to When We Belong Season 2. I'm really excited that you all are continuing to join us on this journey as we explore what it means to really ensure that Washington State is a place where everyone belongs. This means that they got to feel that they belong, which means their lived experience has to not only be centered in the work that we're doing, but we also have to be thinking about all the ways that we can start to change our systems to reflect the needs of all Washingtonians. Well, I'm excited because we got some phenomenal co hosts joining me once again, and you're going to be hearing from a diverse set of voices of folks who are working on these exact issues that we are going to be targeting throughout our topics in their own ways. And look, this is a journey. So you're joining us on this journey as we explore exactly how we're doing this work, why it's important, and some of the barriers that we are experiencing because of this new change of perspective, of need, of the desire to really be there in public service for all Washingtonians. So, we encourage you to join us on the journey, listen to learn and to understand. And we also understand this is a new topic for so many folks. So some of it may get a little bit uncomfortable, but we want you to embrace that because if we're really going to change, it's not going to only require myself and all of the amazing co hosts of this production, but it's going to require you to be a part of this journey with us. So we encourage you to find your way to ensure that in your role, you're also doing the work to make sure people belong. Because, as noted in our title, When We Belong is something that we are truly working towards here in Washington State. Thanks so much for joining us on this journey for season 2.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of When We Belong. I am Treyana Holiday, the Director of Communications for the Office of Equity. So happy to be here again with you out there. Thank you for tuning in today. And I'm going to pass it around because, yeah, you see, we got a new face on the squad. So happy that you are joining us. I'm going to pass it right to you, Kendrick. Hey.
Sure, thank you so much. Hey, everyone. Kendrick Stewart, he, him pronouns. Great to be here. I am one of the two deputy directors at the State Department of Commerce.
Thanks so much, Kendrick. All right, Michaela, hi.
Hi, everyone. Nice to see you again. So Michaela Dolman, I use she, her, they, them pronouns, and I lead the State Human Resources team for Washington State Government.
Thank you so much. Loving your background, Ikea. Thanks for joining us today.
Hello, hello. Thank you, Triana. Hello, everyone. I am Micaiah Guy, the Director of Strategic Partnerships and Innovation within Serve Washington and OFM, and I use she, her pronouns. Happy to be here today.
Absolutely. And of course, Megan. What's up, Megan?
I guess I'm gonna say good morning, but I don't know. It could be afternoon where you're watching this. So hello, everyone. Megan Matthews here. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the director for the Washington State Office of Equity, and excited to be with you all again.
Well, y'all, this is really exciting times. I mean, we were talking about, we see a lot going on in the nation right now around DEI. Money is no longer flowing in as it was before. Some of these efforts are happening. Some leaders are being attacked across the country. And when we talk about when we belong, we understand it's not necessarily a destination like an end goal, but there is a journey that we're on to make sure that we're embedding belonging in Washington state government. And so I'm glad that everyone here today, we really want to talk about how our roles are playing our own pivotal role in that journey. What does that look like for us to open this dialogue up, this discourse up, and really to open up the action-based orientation of what belonging is? And so I really want to open this up because as we were talking about understanding that shift. I'll start by saying, sometimes we understand that, topics get to be a hot topic. DEI became a hot topic. We're seeing belonging kind of increase now. It's like everything is about belonging. Well, how can we ensure that belonging is something where it stays, it sticks in a way that maybe other things before we had DEI, it was something else, y'all, right? So ultimately, how are we ensuring that the idea around belonging and everyone feeling as though they belong is really what is the goal here, for everyone to walk into anything of state government, to understand services in a way that makes them feel centered. And that's important, especially when we're talking about our roles serving all Washingtonians. So I want to bring this up and kind of open it up. I would love to start with you, Micaiah. You had some really great points around this discussion. Tell us a little bit more about how you're seeing it in your role.
Okay, well, I knew you were gonna start with me. My computer clearly didn't want you to start with me. Could not find that button. Okay. And what we were talking about earlier, I'm really thinking about the challenges in the language, as you were saying, kind of like the trending topics and the buzzwords, and how I was saying earlier how, multiple times a week I'm getting multiple emails and articles being sent to me. I'm subscribed to quite a few things about how DEI is being attacked and Black women in DEI are being attacked. And we're trying to figure out how to get around using this language and using the words and making sure that we are not running away from the words, but we're also not weaponizing the words. And we're making sure that as we're in these different spaces, and particularly in the space that I'm in, where things look a little different for me, that everyone can find their place and how they belong within this world. And the challenge for me is trying to figure out how to create a space or navigate a space where the outlier is me, right? I'm the one who doesn't look like I should belong. My lived experience is not the same. I don't look the same as everyone else. And so while I'm trying to bring everyone else into a place where they belong, I'm trying to make it so that I don't erase myself from the picture, really, in order to make everyone else belong. And so now that I don't belong, but they're feeling okay, under trying to figure out if safety is a thing that is able to exist in the workspace for everyone. Is safety real? Is it okay to be brave? Is bravery real within this workplace? At what point am I compromising who I am in order to make everyone else feel okay? And as we look through these different equity and DEI and belonging spaces, something that I know that Kendrick is going to bring up later and that we had talked about earlier is not creating the same thing that we had before and just kind of giving it a different face or what have you. And so understanding the loneliness that comes with this work, being alone in this space as I can be within where I sit, but not being lonely, and that is the challenge that we're really looking at. And so trying to trying to navigate all of that, really.
Yeah, no, 100%. And, I mean, Kendrick, your name was brought up, but I think, you were making some great points about this as well in your role. Tell us more.
Thank you, Trey. Thank you, Mikey. I appreciate that. And again, thank y'all for welcoming me in to kick it with you a little bit. So this one, it's challenging, I think, because how do you recognize unique situatedness that we all have, depending on how you're looking at how we identify. So how do you honor that while also holding space for the totality of other experiences, knowing that some of those are in not direct opposition, but it's hard to come with one story that all sides will say, yep, that represents me and I'm good with that. So I think that's the challenge that we all face. So whether it be in my role as a deputy in a state agency and whoever's role, in state government, how do we actually do that through policy, through process, through meetings, through interactions, through strategic planning? And it's tough because it's easy to be forced into an either or. It's easy to be forced into, if you're advocating for this, that means you don't care for. And that's a false narrative, but it's so easy to have the argument placed there. And then you're in a defensive stance versus really trying to figure out what's the best thing to be doing for all Washingtonians, knowing that we'll have certain folk who are situated different, who will need more. And how do we make sure that we can, tell that story in a way that doesn't minimize, it doesn't over exaggerate, while also ensuring that everyone sees themselves in that person, in those people. That's tough, right? Because I think a counterbalance to all of this that I just said is the fact that we are in a very hyper individualistic society. And it's hard for us, no matter what, culture or what group we belong to or groups we belong to a lot. Um, we don't talk as much. We don't see each other. We have a whole lot of ways of being able to communicate, but we tend to know less about each other, and those bonds aren't really stronger. So if we aren't able to connect and see ourselves and others, and if that muscle is weakening, then I just fear for how we're going to be able to then show up in the workplace and institute some of these things that need a strong social contract outside of the workplace to make it real.
Yeah, so true. Because saying all Washingtonians is real, right? I know you deal with this, Michaela, in your role often, and so I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, no, and it's constantly a challenge, and it's in some ways like a philosophical question of, do we want everyone to belong as they're showing up right now? And I think some of that is the question of, like, when we're thinking about workplace policies, what are the policies that help us kind of set the mutual agreements that say this is what we need to act like and behave like so that everyone can belong? And like Kendrick, you were mentioning, like, I don't know yet, because I know my own lived experiences. I know the lived experiences of the people who I'm closest to, who I'm more inclined to listen to. But what does it look like to create a workplace culture where we have that listening, where we have that kind of co-participation to build, but also those clear expectations that say, and we know that we have a history that has made sure that some people have never been able to belong or never been able to participate, and we need to take that into account as we build the policies. I am like in this stage of my life too, where I'm recognizing I'm a natural cynic. And so I am purposefully trying to bring hope into conversations, saying, if my approach is to be cynical, like, what is the hope? And as we we're talking about the challenges, especially with, like, the potential changes in administrations and all of that, to me, the hope is that maybe this is what we need to make sure that belonging sticks. Because if it's just the word, or if it's just the thing that people are carrying on, it's going to just go by the wayside when the next buzzword comes in. But I think all of the pushback that we're getting in some ways is really helping us to have an airtight argument to say, oh yeah, you saw a hole in that. Let us modify and tweak it so it truly is a place where everyone can belong. Because like you were saying, Kendrick, if we just build another version of something that's going to exclude a whole group of people, like, that's not going to hold. That's not what we want, is another iteration of that exclusive culture, but it's poke holes in it. Yeah, push back. Let us listen to you when you're saying, I don't see that I can belong in this new model, so that we can continue to iterate so that there is something that where everyone can belong. And it's kind of scary because I don't yet know what that looks like when you're talking about people who are saying, but my belonging means that, your potential fear of living in this space. But there's got to be a way that's better than what we're doing right now, that is not just another version of the old.
Yeah, it can't be. It won't work, right? Go ahead, Micaiah.
Can I ask a question? And when we're thinking about that, Michaela, and Megan as well, because I know that you'll be working hard on these policies, as we're thinking about that, when we're thinking about, someone or anyone's belonging causing someone else's belonging to be in a place of fear, wondering when we can kind of challenge whether it's fear or discomfort. Because at some point, like, discomfort is okay. Like, I'm okay with you being uncomfortable. I'm not okay with you being fearful. Like, if you're in fear, then that's something that we should really, dig into. But that discomfort, I think, is a place that there are groups of people who have been uncomfortable for a very long time. So discomfort is okay, right? But that fear is a different thing. And I think that maybe as as state government employees, I'll be the first to own, discomfort is something that I think that we shy away from. People get uncomfortable and we're like, oh, okay, well, that people are uncomfortable, let's stop. Let's not talk about this again. And I think that that's when we should really dig in and lean on it and really understand the root of what that discomfort is, and then, really deal with that thing.
This is Megan. Micaiah, that I love that you brought in the fear and discomfort. I think both of those make us human beings revert to our instinctive behaviors, our fight or flight, where we're no longer processing thoughtfully, and we're no longer concerned about others. We are more in survival mode at that point. So it's very about me, and mine. And then that's where we get into those zero sum, right? And I think that the conversations that we're having is so important. First of all, let me say too, the Office Executive got new backgrounds, y'all. Look at these. Thank you, comms team. These are incredible. I was supposed to say that, but you struck me, Micaiah, with that. And I was like, oh, I got to go there. But I just want to highlight the Office Equity comms team for these beautiful virtual backgrounds. I just love so much. The discomfort and fear fear is such a powerful tool, and discomfort is becoming there as well, because it's interesting. We spend so much of our K through 12 experience learning, right? And with learning is you're uncomfortable because you don't know if you're going to get it right or wrong, right? When we're learning how to spell a word, we probably get some words wrong, right? And you have to be okay with getting it wrong. You have to be okay with that learning and being in this vulnerable space. And somehow when we become adults, we're no longer okay with not knowing how to do things. And so then we hear, well, what's the right way? How do we do this right? And that right or wrong is also embedded in state in a way that causes harm, because now we're saying, well, if this is the way that we're doing it, and really right has been just the way that we're doing it, right? And so if we're not doing it that way, then that's wrong. When it's just a way, and there are so many different ways to accomplish something, especially too, thinking through the written word. And if it's not written down, then either if it's not written down, then we can or can't do it, right? If it's not written down, then we can't do it, even though there's nothing says that we can't. And we spend a lot of time crafting these policies with all this language in it that does not allow us to have the flexibility to meet people. So then we can't even treat people in the different ways that they need to be treated to make them feel seen, whole, and valued, right? So much of when I became a supervisor was about treating people the same. And I quickly realized that if I treated everybody the same, then no one would be happy with me. So I had folks who would come into my office and they wanted to meet every morning. We would just chat it up for a couple of minutes, right? Just check in. And I had people who were like, okay, unless there's something you want to tell me, like, don't see me. I don't need to see you. And I was like, okay, right? But you can't treat people the same because they don't want the same things. If I would have made everybody come and check in with me in the morning, there were some people who have been mad because I'm messing up their workflow, right? And they don't have anything to say. And they're like, I didn't come in to chit chat, And so I think that I'm digressing, but we can't stop moving because people are feeling discomfort and that they're in fear. I think that we do have to have better ways of dealing with the fear. Also, that because it's such a critical tool to be used, we have to know the ways that and notice the ways that people are they're having their fear activated, right? Because that's an intentional part of keeping this, right? Because once somebody's feared, they're in that fight or flight. Now they're going to push back on anything you're trying to do. And you can't reason with them. I don't care how much data you use, how much logic you use. You can't logic with somebody who's in fight or flight survival mode, right? So then what do you do? But I also feel very strongly that we can no longer allow folks to stop us from moving forward, because I think that, especially in state, right, incrementalism has been a huge thing. Oh, just do a little bit here, right? Because that gives people time to get open to the idea, time to get comfortable with the change and all that. And where has that led us? The complex problems of the 21st century, where hardly anyone's needs are being met right now. And we're getting further and further behind, and people are being further and further hurt. And that is everybody, right? Like when we're out there talking to the people we love and care about, our communities, Very few people are saying, oh yeah, hey, I'm thriving, I'm living my best life, hey. Very few, very few. So government is less and less able to meet the needs because we have become further and further behind because we're stuck in incrementalism. We need to let that go because we need substantial, significant change right now. That means that those of us in state government have to get really, really comfortable with being uncomfortable and significant change. That's a culture change in of itself, right? But we have to, otherwise we'll never meet that need. And then what is government for? Why do people distrust government? Because we're not doing what we need to be doing. And I say this just so everybody knows who's a state employee. I've been a state employee 16 years. Okay. I'm talking to myself too. I'm not pointing my finger at nobody. I ain't pointing it back on myself. So I am with you, but I'm just calling us out. I'm not calling us out. It is time for us to act, because if we can deliver, then our community members no longer have to be in that fight or flight because their needs are being met. And then they can begin to see the others that are around them and help deal with their needs, right? Government is creating this false sense of scarcity. We can't expect people to say, even though my government's making me think that there's only a little bit, I'm just gonna somehow understand that there's enough and I'm gonna trust. We have to be the ones to deliver. Then once people get their needs met, right, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, once people's needs get met, then they're like, you know what, I got mine. Do you need some bread over here? Hey, I got some for you over here, because now they know there's enough. So it really is incumbent upon government to change the way that we operate so that we can actually serve everyone. And I'll stop right there.
No, this is a really great, I mean, I love what everybody is bringing into this discussion today. And again, it's important that we understand, like, for the audience, I mean, we're all here representing as state government employees. And ultimately, all of us understand that there's something we get to do in our roles to contribute to this overall effort. For me, I recognize that when we think about equitable approaches, that means that we have to be focused on those who haven't had their needs met. That's just it. That's what it means. How we bring people whose needs have been met, how we bring them along to understand that is important. So when we talk about fear, when we talk about, scarcity mindset, when we talk about, man, if they're getting, that means I'm not getting, all of these things are real. And they're being discussed amongst our teams, y'all. That's the beauty of us doing this podcast, is to give you a glimpse behind the curtain so you can see that not only are there representatives from, the areas of the global majority that can represent folks who are like, man, my needs haven't been met for generations. My needs ain't been met, right? In a lot of communities of the global majority, they say, look, I don't expect government to meet my needs because they ain't done it. So we got to have our own systems where we're addressing the needs of our community. And I think it's also on us as government employees and as state government in general to recognize those models, right? Of resilience, of resource gathering, of collective sharing, of collective power. It's on us to also recognize and begin to center those models. Okay, so y'all got it. And so, how can we resource that? How can we learn from that? How can we understand a bit more about that so that we can figure out, okay, for those who maybe aren't doing it, here are some things that are working in these other communities, and here's how we're contributing, right, to that great body of work. And I think it's so true because, resilience is key. Resilience has been key for so many indigenous communities across the globe, right? That they realize, okay, look, the resources, we got to do what the land is providing us. How do we maximize what the land is providing us? And these kinds of models have existed since time immemorial, right? Or time memorial, how they say it, right? Since the beginning of time, right? They existed. And ultimately, we get to now say, okay, well, right. Because in some communities are like, look, these handouts ain't gonna do it, right? This is why we talk about hand ups, right? How can government begin to say, you know what, we recognize some of this work has been transactional. What does it mean for us to move into a relational model that really works well and coincides with the ways that community is moving in their own right, right? that relational approach also matters in this. But I think it's something that we can also do to maybe bring some of those folks along. Kendrick, I don't know if you have stuff to add here. Tell us a little bit about how we do that. You know, for those who have been getting it, how do we make sure that they're along on this journey with us?
That's a tough one. That's a tough one. I was just thinking about, so our state's demographics, Mikey, I know, and we were kind of prepping and talking about it. I know you had some US Census quick facts stuff up. And I believe we're like, what, 74% white, something like that in our state, maybe a little bit more. So I started thinking about, okay, what does that look like in individual workplaces? We know it's something like that. You may have some shifts here and there, but for the most part, that's what it is. Now, how we all identify and what folk believe, we're not going to know, right? And that's applied to whatever group, whatever demographic slice. So then how do we set something up that's really going to rely on the same folk who are in positions of power, who have been there, who are still there, who will be there? What's the change that has to happen to get something that is changed from those folk when it comes to strategy? And not just strategy, let me back up. When it comes to a desire to do this thing, when it comes to them actually seeing the problem, not through the lens of, oh, I know it's impacting those folk, to this is impacting me because it's impacting those folk, right? So then that person walks into their job, if their job happens to be in their bedroom and they're, working virtual, whatever the case may be, they walk in and it's with a different perspective. Now, what's on their hearts and on their minds and in their souls is different because of how they identify with someone else's struggle. And that's something we can't see, right? You can't, there's no window into that. And that's what in my position, which is basically focused on operations, that's what I think about day in and day out is what's the case to be made for those folk, no matter what that initiative is or the project is that I'm working on or supporting, that is, so, going to move things and transform things as far as government. Megan, we talked about that a lot. How are we transforming things? So how do we do that? Current state, freeze frame, with the folk we have right now, with the skill level we have right now. Now I'm talking about who could be there 5 years from now, who could be there if we know right now. Freeze frame, who's there right now? What can we do with those folk right now, right? And that's a tough one. I don't know the answer to that because the unknown is such a huge part of this. I don't know who actually cares about folk who look like me and who doesn't care about to the extreme folk who look like me, right? And that can be played out in a lot of other ways. So I can lay out a wonderful strategy that I think is wonderful, a wonderful project that I may think is wonderful, and I don't know what folk who are saying, yeah, sounds good, are actually thinking when they go and sit in their car, when they talk to, like, I don't know that part. So how do we change hearts and minds? And I know that's, look, folk in different circles, whether it was around the radio or it was around a fire or it was around whatever, have been talking about this exact same thing going back to time immemorial. I think is what it is, Trey. I might be wrong. But they've been talking about that, right? Same thing. How do those of us who have this, whatever this is, in a society that has a whole lot of plurals, right? So a whole lot of different folk and a whole lot of different things. So we have a lot of things that are differences, and those things are great. And we are here together. So how do we see ourselves as being here together so that we act like we're here together? Because it shouldn't be hard, technically. The words right in that background, we the people, I mean, according to that and according to all the laws, we should be set. We're not, clearly. So here we go. So all that to say, I don't know, Trey. I don't know. I'm still trying to figure it out.
Well, that's the realest answer I think you could give to it. I see you. Go ahead, Maikia.
Yeah, I don't know, but I got a lot to say because this is so the position that I have now and the transition in my title requires me to be extremely community facing, which I love. I love it. I love that state government is saying in my position is saying, you know what? The people doing the work, y'all know what it is. Y'all know how to do this. You're already doing it. And so it allows me to get into the community and talk to the community leaders. And what I've learned, and I'm a transplant to Washington. And so I also have that lens, kind of like from the outside looking in, like, I don't know anything about the people here. Don't know what y'all love, what you enjoy, what you care about. I know what federal priorities are because my job requires me to know that. I know what state priorities are because my job requires me to know that. I don't know what Walla Walla's priorities are. I don't know what Tacoma's priorities are. I don't know what Vancouver's priorities are. And so instead of me coming in with my federal money and my state money and saying, we're going to give you another food bank and plant some trees because everybody loves trees and food banks, I get to go to Tacoma and to Walla Walla and I think Tri-Cities in a couple of months and say, hey, what do you actually like need and want in this community before we fund another program, before we give another grant to another nonprofit? What is actually going on here? And I think in saying that, we're taking our connections and our power and our money and all of those things, and we're saying, we don't need to hemorrhage resources from you by saying we know what you need and we're going to take all this and we're going to decide what's great for you. We're going to come in and say, I'm just here and I got some things, but you got some things. So how can I partner with you to make sure that you're getting what you need? And you tell me, because guess what? You were already doing it. Before I got my position, before they changed my title, before they decided that what you got to say is important, you were already doing it. And so I think that one of the ways that we can start to do it, not changing overnight, because there's years and years and years of people not caring what the government has to say because the government ain't cared about them. Right. And so it's gonna take me showing up to a couple of community events and just being a pretty face. Okay. And if they ask for my card, I'm gonna give them my card. But if they don't ask for my card, I'm not gonna offer it. I'm just here. It's going to take, a couple of, maybe it might take 6 months of me just showing up and being there and introducing myself and getting to know them and understanding their priorities. And then we can talk about how we can collaborate, how we can emphasize, how we can boost, how we can help. And I think that is how we can start to understand and trust each other and start to break down some of that, what Megan was talking about, that zero-sum mentality, where we can start to, where Kendrick is more like within state government and working on the state government employees, and we can start to bring in, our different agencies are working on the external stakeholders, we can start to bring them in, because that's what we want to come in, because we still need to hire folk. That's what we want to come in and be able to give us that different perspective and say, actually, this is what's really going on. So y'all can't see it because y'all over here, but this is what's really going on. And I think that's what's going to start breaking down those silos and breaking down those barriers and start making people feel like they belong and they're not just a byproduct, or they're not just a pet project, or they're not just a buzzword or a trend, that they're actually a priority, that they belong, that they are important, that they matter, that they're seen and respected and protected and cared for. I think that's what it takes, instead of us taking federal and state and governor priority, all important, because where money's coming from, but also they're the ones doing the work and they're living the lives and they're eating the food and producing and creating the jobs that we don't even know about, that could do so much for us. I think that's what it's going to take. And if we get more of those and more of that intentional, community engagement, and not broadcasting our community engagement. But we ain't got to tell people all the time, here's where we're going and this is what we're doing and come see us. And they don't want all of that all the time. Just, that real like brotherhood and sisterhood, like it used to be, like it can be again, if we're intentional about it. I think that will go a long way towards making some strides to us bringing community outside of it just being our talking. Start walking what we're talking. I think that's what's going to make the difference.
Yeah, start walking what we're talking. Hey, yes, absolutely. And I mean, to both of y'all's points too. I mean, I was talking about, this is why communities of care, the model of caring for one another, is so key and is so important. Not only does it allow for you to usher in exactly what you're talking about, Mykea, here. Hey, because I care for you, I recognize the brilliance that already exists in what you're doing in community to make sure that people there are thriving. Right. And so how do we support that? How do we resource that? Michaela, I mean, how do you see this continuation in some of the things that you're doing or the things that need to be happening?
Yeah, I mean, as Kendrick and Mykea were talking, I just kept thinking about how much relationships matter. And I've been taking this training, and what Gare was saying today was, we are more segregated in our school systems today than we were 50 years ago. Despite these policies. And they say, the most segregated time in America is apparently Sunday mornings, when people go to their practices of faith. And it's that recognition that we will remain segregated in our communities unless we actively try to go out and integrate ourselves with other people, because, you know, from school system to our church systems, uh, it's designed that way, and, you know, with neighborhoods and everything. And so just thinking about my role being focused on the workplace, you know, the advantage to, I never knew a Muslim person until I started working in state government. And I came into state government after 2001, you know, when the Twin Towers were attacked, and I had no idea how much Islamophobia I had until I started interacting and working with people who are Muslim. And then once I built those relationships, then my capacity for empathy, my fear went away, and my capacity to empathy and my willingness to say, no, I want to put myself out there. I want to make a place where we can both belong. But I didn't have that desire before I knew someone and cared about them and loved them. And it's that idea of, you know, when we're talking about, it's what I really appreciate about the pair model of going out and being with community. So like what you were saying, Micaiah, and just kind of what we're pushing out in our desire to say, we need to go out and listen to people, and we need to more than just listen. You're saying, you know, listen to respond, but to listen to truly understand the person. Because when I understand you, then I want to care for you and I want to belong with you. But it really just starts with that relationship aspect. And, you know, in the workplace, there's been kind of this trend of, you know, before it's like you, whatever you do, you leave it at the door, right? Like you come in and you compartmentalize. And we're talking about, you know, and it's kind of a phrase that I'm not sure I fully appreciate yet, but that, you know, bringing your whole selves to work. But if I can know more of you, then I can start to build a workplace or co-create a workplace where we can all belong. But we're not there yet because we still have these workplaces where we are expected to compartmentalize, or we're not truly listening to each other because there's still this, oh no, professionalism looks this way, or in order to be successful, you need to exhibit these traits to be there. But I do feel like the benefit to, you know, yes, our state is still not that diverse in compared to a lot of states, and our workforce is not yet keeping up, but we are getting more diverse. And the more diverse we get, the more we're able to listen and build relationships with each other and understand each other. And the more, I mean, the more that the pair plan just kind of gets infused in how we do our work. So we start listening and building relationships with community. Um, I'm choosing to see the hopefulness in that, in those relationships, our workforce will start to become a workforce that says, I didn't see you before, but I see you now, and I'm willing to listen to you and change policy. Because I can say, you know, putting myself out there, there are so many times where I was like, I did not know this group of people. I never met someone, you know, who was non-binary before I started working in state government either. And now my understanding is helping me say, okay, now how do we co-create this? So it's just, I think if we can level it on relationships, which is just so simple, and it's, you know, it's just the basis. There's so much work that needs to happen afterwards, but I don't think we can do it without that relationship.
Yeah,
Completely agree. Let me jump in
100%.
really quick. Totally agree, Michaela. And I love that you kind of shared an example of that you know, really resonated in that you had your own growth to go to, and we all do, obviously, when it comes to just none of us know the totality of the human experience. But I love that it basically, because I was in my head thinking, like, chicken or the egg, right? Like it's always right, egg. But it's like, okay, so what actually is first in that scenario? And you kind of laid it out. And I think that's true with all of us, that none of us are just, you know, completely purely empathetic, whatever, you know, that is, without actually having some formidable set of experiences and exposures to things that are outside of us, for us to now look and say, oh, I see, number one, I see whatever that person or thing is. And secondly, I value, you know, whatever that person or thing is. So if that's what we're kind of focused on, is how do we set up then opportunities for folk to see and experience each other in ways that aren't focused on necessarily safety, although we know that in the workplace that has to be there, but is kind of more leaning towards bravery and just, you know that we have to create that. Because if that's the impetus, and I agree with you, Michaela, it is, that's the vehicle and it's the simple thing, but it's very complex. But without that, nothing can happen. That is the engine, it's the oil, it's the whatever the paradigm, let's use a not quite as dirty paradigm, it's the whatever that energy source is that keeps that thing going. It's a relationship. So how do we create a space that values relationships where we're able to be? I agree with you. I don't know that I necessarily identify as much with the authentic self because I know that it's not hard, not easy for us, those of us who aren't the common, if you will, to bring our authentic selves to work. It's kind of risky actually. But at least we can bring more of what makes us who we are and feel that we're valued. So I appreciate you saying that, McCullough.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Megan.
I would say, I think it has to be a both. I think, everything that we're talking about has to be a both and, because the reality with exposure, right? We're talking about exposure, relationships. That is the most effective tool in tolerance, in opening our minds. And for the folks who don't have a lot of numbers, it's exhausting. It's because you put the labor on those folks then, right? That's what happens. And I know for me personally, I experienced that during 2020 after George Floyd was murdered. I was exhausted. I was exhausted. And then I was like, wow, all this effort I'm putting in, and I'm maybe interacting with 3 or 4 people. 3 or 4 people. That's not a lot, because what comes along with that relationships, right, in that building is it's time and a lot of energy. And so I think that for me, and I have the same experience, Makala, when I think maybe this is like just growing up, but when I was younger, everything was black and white. Everything was. And now I'm like, is there anything that's black and white? Yeah, I'm like, I just don't know at this point. I don't know. But for me now, I don't necessarily have to be exposed to someone to be like, other people have a different life experience than me. How can I make sure that we have as much representation in what we're doing and still allow ourselves the flexibility in what we're creating so that it can be able to adapt to gaps that still remain. There's nothing that's perfect, right? Everything we produce has gaps. So this idea that we have to keep talking over for a year to develop the perfect policy doesn't exist. It's got to be both. We need both the chicken and we need an egg. But I really believe that. So for me, the responsibility is mine as I have grown and become aware that Megan has a lot of gaps. I don't necessarily need to be exposed. When someone says, hey, this is what this is doing for me, I don't need to ask them to, well, why, and blah, 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 and tell me more about your experience, right? I'm already thinking, Megan, whatever you're creating right now, it's got gaps. It's not perfect. Let's not even act like it's going to be perfect, right? But let's do this. And then we can, I think someone talked about iterations. We can continue to make it stronger, and also the responsibility of each of us who are implementing things. We understand that there's gaps, so we have to be okay with meeting the need as the need is presented to us. So I just want us to also be mindful about this experience of the relationships. I think you said 75% white in Washington State. And then if we're talking about other communities of concern, right? That, we're talking about the burden we'll put on those folks to be that education. I think that each of us as adults have to take some responsibility onto ourselves to say, we just know that none of us know it all, and we're going to do the best we can, and we're going to continue learning and be committed to this growth journey. And then just appreciate the new relationships we get to build through work, because we mostly live in segregated neighborhoods. Through work gives us the opportunity to meet new people from different backgrounds. But I'm not going to, now that I'm aware, right? Now that I'm aware that I have gaps, I'm not going to put that that learning on that responsibility on someone else. And I think that's, with all of this, it's got to be a both and, not an either or.
Yeah, and I would just say, like,
yeah,
oh, sorry, Trey. I was just gonna say, like, I hope people are listening to this and learning, because I mean, a lot of my learning now is listening to podcasts for exactly what you're talking about, Megan, of not wanting to tax individuals to say, teach me. But there's so much out there that we can learn from just listening to these types of conversations and saying, oh, I didn't know that before, but I can learn through this, and I don't need to be given into to be able to learn.
Well,
And if
I
the
think
main thing is a curiosity, I'm sorry, Trey,
Mhm.
if the main thing is a curiosity, and that's kind of what I took from yours, Megan, is that it can be through an experience with folk, or it can be just through a curiosity and you knowing that you have gaps and you're curious then about other folk experiences. So you'll seek out the relationships or the information to be able to help fill in whatever those gaps are for you as you move those things forward, that benefits you at work, benefits you at home, etc. That makes sense. Sorry, Troy.
No, I mean, y'all, these are all great additions to this. We could probably go on for another 30 minutes, but we're going to wrap up here. This was a great discussion. And again, what I was going to say was kind of to all of y'all's points that, there's something that has to spark the interest of an individual to want to care, right? In order to get to a both and at all, something has to be sparked in order for that to even happen, for them to build relationship, for them to want to learn, okay, how do I contribute? How have I maybe extracted from this process, not even unbeknownst to me, not intentionally, but how have I done that? Or maybe I know I've done some intentional things, man. How do I change that? How do I rectify that? How do I recognize that there's a lot of perspectives out here that I've never been exposed to? And how do I begin to expose myself to those perspectives? And I agree with you, Makayla. Like, that's why we put this out here as not just like audio in like a podcast, but a video series so that people can see our faces, get to understand that we're coming from a place of pureness, for all of us. And so I really wish that all of y'all out there, y'all are getting this, you're getting the message from all of these folks who are pouring into the efforts here at Washington State government to change government so it is belonging for all Washingtonians. And honestly, there is a model that is being crafted, intricately woven and sewn together so that maybe we can get it right here for the state and maybe we could present a model for the rest of the nation. Now, it's going to be different. We already know in different states because of all of the differences that exist. But how can we begin to set the tone here in Washington State and make sure that it's felt by all Washingtonians? Thank y'all so much, all of y'all. Kudos to all of y'all for showing up today and making some time in your busy schedules to be a part of this amazing discussion. And thank you all for watching once again.